Explain the main obstacle towards gaining civil rights up to 1945. After slavery was abolished under the 13th Amendment in 1865, it led black Americans to gain their freedom. Nevertheless, life was still very difficult as many did not own any land and had to work as sharecroppers, where they paid their white landlords to work the land. This left many living in abject poverty. There were many factors that caused obstacles to civil rights, such as legal impediments, popular prejudice, Ku Klux Klan, lack of political influence and divisions in the black community. While legal impediments was important, the most important obstacle in achieving civil rights was the lack of political influence. Lack of political influence. A poll tax was introduced, which had to be paid before you could register to vote. This stopped many black people from registering to vote because they could not afford to pay the tax. It was ruled that voters must understand the American Constitution. Since many black people in the South were illiterate, they could not pass this test. This was an obstacle as without the support of the federal government, black Americans had no one to challenge the segregation laws. President Woodrow Wilson argued, "Segregation is not humiliating and is a benefit for you, black gentlemen." Furthermore, politicians did not want to ruin their political careers as most Southern voters would not support a politician who wanted to help black people. However, this was less of an obstacle as President Franklin D. Roosevelt had an informal network of more than 100 black American government employees, known as the Black Cabinet. They worked to pressure the president for equal opportunities, showing that black Americans had some, if little, political influence, separate but equal. Legal impediments. The U.S. Supreme Court case, Plessy v. Ferguson, in 1896 declared that segregation was legal and constitutional. It was agreed that black and white people should be separate but equal if facilities were of same standards. Segregation, Jim Crow laws, meant that black children were forbidden to attend school with white children and were sent to schools with poorer resources. They were not allowed to use old textbooks which had previously been used in white schools. The separate but equal ruling proved a significant obstacle, as the Supreme Court was the ultimate legal authority in the USA. It allowed for the inequality gap to be furthered, as it made the separation of black and white Americans fully legal. The outcome of the Plessy case was not overturned until 1954, over 50 years after it was first decreed as legal. However, this was less of an obstacle as the Jim Crow laws which prevented black Americans from living a normal life did not exist in the northern states. In the North, this allowed black Americans to be more accepted in society, although still faced discrimination, so had opportunities to challenge inequality. Activities of the Ku Klux Klan. The KKK used terror and fear, including cross burnings near the homes of people they wanted to frighten and marching through streets wearing full cloaks and masks. People could be kidnapped, whipped, mutilated or murdered, called lynching. Photos of lynchings were often sold as souvenir postcards. This was an obstacle as the Klan had powerful members that ensured that very few cases were ever brought to trial. Those responsible were rarely brought to justice, and Klan members knew that their friends in the courts would not convict them. They could continue activities that would limit the opportunities for civil rights. However, this was less of an obstacle as the influence of the Klan went into decline by the late 1920s. By 1930, Klan membership in Alabama had dropped to less than 6,000, one of the South's most racist states, and it was not popular in the North. Their reduced numbers meant they had less power to shape public opinion or impact on the lives of most black Americans in the South and North. Popular prejudice, northern states. Around 1916, a factory wage in the urban North was typically 3 times more than what black Americans could expect to make working the land in the rural South. So many moved north. In 1910, the African American population of Detroit was 6,000. By 1929, this had increased to 120,000. Between 1910 and 1930, the African American population in northern states had increased by about 40%. This was an obstacle as black Americans in the North found it hard to escape poverty. Many found themselves segregated into communities and areas known as ghettos, where it was difficult to escape the poor living conditions of crime and poverty. This highlighted that discrimination was not simply a Southern problem, but was widespread. However, this was less of an obstacle as there emerged a new middle class of Black Americans. For example, Black newspapers like the Pittsburgh Courier and church groups increased the sense of Black community spirit. Middle-class groups provided the location, money, and leadership where politics and demand for change were discussed. Divisions in the Black community, Booker T. Washington, argued that Black Americans should not antagonize white Americans by demanding political and social equality, but should earn respect through hard work and education. Marcus Garvey believed in Negro nationalism, which encouraged Black culture and pride in being Black. He argued racial bias was ingrained in white people and saw all white Americans as potential Klansmen. This was an obstacle as different organizations with different methods meant there was no unified movement. These diverse groups and individuals meant that little was achieved because of a lack of joined focus. The Jim Crow laws were too powerful to attack, when Black Americans lacked a unified voice to overturn them. However, this was less of an obstacle as the Supreme Court declared the Grandfather Clause unconstitutional due to the campaigns of the NAACP. The groups drew attention to social injustices affecting the Black community, and Garvey had helped to promote Black consciousness.